Today we are diving into the world of Russian southpaws, and they all come from the same place, the same region, and they are all the same family. I am talking about Islam Makhachev and Umar and Usman Nurmagomedov. Now, I don't think it is a coincidence that all three of these guys are left-handed. I do think these guys are more right-handed opponents who use the southpaw method because it is a very evasive style if you are able to use your footwork very well. Their ability to maneuver and their ability to really game plan from that southpaw position is very interesting, and they do have some differences that I want to highlight. I want to first talk about their legs, and I know that sounds really weird, but I want to talk about their lead leg battle. Now, from a southpaw and orthodox perspective, that lead leg always has to be on the outside, or that is what is always taught to you, to be on that outside foot. And Usman and Umar does a fantastic job of doing that. Their ability to maneuver outside of that power side is the main reason why they don't really get hurt often in their fights. And their ability to use that lead leg as kind of like a fencer is incredible. They use their lead legs throwing teeps, leg kicks, high kicks, question mark kicks, all while moving away from that power side and being on that outside foot. Now, for Islam, it's a little bit different because I don't see him using that lead leg often. He does throw inside leg kicks pretty often, but a lot of it comes from that rear leg. He's actually the opposite out of this group. I actually do believe that Islam could be left-handed. I think he actually could be his dominant hand being left because his lead leg is throwing at all three levels, and it is a very powerful kick. We have seen the knockout of Volk. We have also seen just body kicks, leg kicks, and high kicks thrown at all three levels. But his fencer, I guess his poke that Usman and Umar have with the lead leg is mainly his jab and that lead arm of his. I think his boxing is very underrated, and his ability to jab and also throw a very awkward cross that is constantly getting connections. I mean, he has very good boxing, and it's very awkward, his boxing style, but it is very effective. But there is a contrast. While his boxing is mainly the way he gets away and evade those power punches, he steps on the inside sometimes, but he also steps a lot on the outside as well. But the main focal point for the three are different. We have the lead leg being a lot more important to Usman and Umar, while the rear leg and the boxing and jab of Islam being more effective in the strike kick. That can mean a lot of different things. I think the distance management of Umar and Usman are just to a level of a kick, like a kicking level. And I think Islam is a lot more comfortable in being in that boxing range because he actually has a lot of power behind them. But I want to talk about when they face offensive opponents or when they face pressure. Now, pressure could mean different things. In my opinion, I think pressure just means any sort of offense. Now, it happens when we see very good opponents. Dustin Poirier, I think Paul Hughes for Usman, and for Umar, I mean Merab. But when dealt with pressure, they all react with the same sort of tendencies. They have an incredible ability to go under and shoot and chain wrestle with these offensive opponents. They will all similarly collide into and disrupt the rhythm of their opponent's pressure. And they will all shoot in different formats, whether it's a single leg, double leg. Islam against Moicano was able to chain into a sort of single leg knee tap using his force. Umar has a lot of different trips and different ways of getting into the takedowns. But I think they all have different other tendencies other than this chain wrestling ability. What Islam does exceptionally well is his Muay Thai plum, his ability to rise up into this pressure and get those two hands behind the head, his ability to off balance, throw knees, and be able to trip people out in this position has been shown multiple times in his career. His Dustin Poirier fight was exceptional in his Thai plum striking, and against Arman Tsarukyan his first time, he got a sweep all the way to top mount. Islam's ability to use those judo and those sort of foot sweeps is a lot better than Usman and Umar's, in my opinion. I think what Umar does really well is his chain wrestling, but his distance management has him rarely ever in a boxing rage. And so when he does get into pressure, he's usually at a kicking range where he uses his footwork and his ability to maneuver outside of the opponent's power. And he never really gets into barrages. Now, when the fight goes later, which I will talk about, we will see a lot more flaws to Umar's game. But Umar, overall, his ability to be quicker and being a lot more evasive in those earlier rounds has him rarely ever getting into this collision moment. I think Usman does what these two do, all at just a tiny bit of a lesser rate. Now, I do think that is a little bit of a UFC bias to me, because I think Paul Hughes and other fighters like that who have fought Usman are great fighters, but I don't think they're UFC caliber. And I think Usman can do a lot better in these sort of opponents that he has faced. But he has a very dynamic striking style, and he's kind of more of a Zabit sort of striking style where it's very flashy and it is very out of tune and it's very disruptive. But we have seen weaknesses to that game, which I will get on later on. Overall, these three have the ability to stay outside and control the octagon, and their striking never really leads them into a lot of danger. And when they do collide and do have that footwork mishap, they have the ability to chain wrestle at such a phenomenal pace that a lot of these newer fighters are really lacking in just what the Russians are doing right now, what the Dagestani wrestlers are doing, which is, starting from a lifestyle of wrestling. They are just living and breathing a wrestling format and a wrestling lifestyle. There are times of weakness, though, and I know Khabib is going to hate me when I say this, is when they get tired. And Khabib is going to constantly push them to get to these points of never being tired, but it does happen to some of these fighters. And I think the most obvious person and the first person we have to go to is his most recent fight with Umar Nurmagomedov and Merab, where Merab was able to collide and constantly disrupt this Umar and Umar's style. And I think the Russians have such a great style, but it is a style that they have to constantly react, and they have to constantly move and move away and collide and attack or defend, and they can never really let off the hook. In a 25-minute affair, at some point we have seen flashes of these weaknesses, and in Umar's case, Merab was able to constantly collide and make Umar react to what he was throwing, make Umar react to the constant throwing of the wrestling and the overhands and the ability to box. It was such a tough style for 25 minutes that Umar eventually started to fade. And when he started to fade, we saw those glimpses of, weakness. He has an ability to dip his head down to overhands. He also has his footwork kind of fades in those later rounds when he gets exhausted. Obviously, when you're tired, you're a lot more lazier. And we have seen these lazy moments from these three. For example, for Usman would be in his most recent fight against Paul Hughes. Paul Hughes was able to constantly be in that boxing range and constantly give Usman just trouble. He's constantly in that 5 rounds giving Usman energy. You have to keep working. You have to keep working. You can't constantly be flawless. And Paul Hughes had a lot of success in those later rounds because of that. For Islam, we have really only seen one bad round, and it was against Volkanovski in that 5th round, where, the pace was really incredible. And that's kind of what I want to get into. This is a lot easier said than done. I'm not saying the ability to beat these guys are by constantly dragging them to this 5th round affair and hope you gas them and win enough rounds. It's just so difficult to beat these three that the only signs we have seen of people winning has been through that format, through that game plan of a war. And I think that's how good these fighters are, is that they're so good that you can't just easily beat these guys. They are so defensively sound. They are so evasive. They are so offensive. You have to constantly worry about them that you can't just put them out in the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd. It is such a difficult fight. It's a lot easier said than done. These three are operating at such a high clip that it takes a one-of-one, tough fighter to be able to crack these codes. But when these codes are cracked, we have seen that they can't operate at a 25-minute affair at this perfect rate. Eventually, they will stop moving as quickly. Eventually, they will stop colliding as much, and they will start giving into this. They will start giving into these flaws. I think for Islam, I think Charles Oliveira can give him those sort of flaws and give those openings I think a guy like Charles has the ability to really effectively work in all positions of the fight with Islam. And other than Charles, I think when you look into the higher weight classes, maybe Bilal, but they will never fight. I think Chimaev would beat him because that's just a weight thing. I'm thinking of just the possible outcomes of Islam. What are realistic fights? And I think Charles is actually a fight that can go into that 5th round and you can sit there and say, Charles is starting to open up Islam. For Umar, we have seen Merab beat him. We have seen Merab do that, and I think he can do that again. I don't think anyone can beat Merab at this moment until this guy somehow slows down. But when is he going to slow down? Someone has to put him out cold, I think, and I don't think Umar has that ability. Other than Merab, though, I think Petr Yan has a very good ability to negate Umar's offense and have the ability to start mountaining and avalanching towards a 5-round decision. And for Usman, I know he's in Bellator. I would love to see him in the UFC, but I don't think that would happen anytime soon. So in his terms of his Bellator opponents, I really do think Paul Hughes can beat him in a 5-round affair. As long as Paul Hughes comes with a similar game plan as he did the last time, but he needs to throw a lot more offense. I feel like he respected Usman way too much. I think his ability and his thought when he got into those 3rd and 4th rounds that he can actually defend Usman. He can defend these takedowns. And I think he realized that later on where he started to throw a lot more offense. I think when he gets when he starts going a lot quicker against Usman, it'd be interesting to see in that 5-round affair who would come out on top. But overall, I think these 3 are operating so well that they're reigning MMA for years to come. Overall, let me know how you feel about this breakdown. Let me know what you want to see next. I kind of want to do a Merab breakdown now that I'm talking about Umar and that Merab fight. I think Merab is just approaching a bantamweight GOAT status at this point. But anyways, it's been Santi. It's been Studs.